The Rosie and Bill Show wish to thank our primary sponsors. The Mallon Agency, located in Springfield, PA, where they take pride in exceeding expectations every time. Anthony DeCecco and our friends at Tennis Addiction are ready to serve all your tennis needs at their beautiful facility in Exton, PA.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show. Our guest this week is a true music icon. In addition to a stellar solo career, he was a member of Buffalo Springfield, Poco, and one of the most successful duos of all time, Loggins and Messina. Please welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show, singer, songwriter, and producer, Jim Messina. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm sorry that I'm in a vehicle, but that's life these days, right? On the road again, so to speak. I want to be available to do the work I need to do, but I'm also a husband and got kids, cats, dogs, ducks, chickens, donkeys, and a horse to look after. So,
wait, you're a farmer?
My wife, prior to moving to Tennessee, she said, I'd like to have a horse when we were living in California. And I thought, golly, you're from the Czech Republic, you're a school teacher. What do you know about horses? And I'd had them in my life. And man, I'm telling you, horses are expensive to feed. I mean, there's always something going wrong with them health-wise. And I said, why don't we first start with, an equine like a donkey, right? And I'm thinking to myself, maybe we start with 3 donkeys, right? Because we were having issues with coyotes killing our animals. Oh. So I thought, I'll get 3 donkeys. We'll rescue them. They won't be in that great of health. She'll have to spend all this time feeding them and fixing them. And so we get the donkeys, and I mean, they're bloody-eyed and, fly bitten and everything. And I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be a little. She went in, got them fixed, healthy. And within a year and a half, the vet said, Michaela, you got the healthiest donkeys in the whole valley. And within 5 years, these donkeys almost looked like race horses. They were in such great shape. So she says, can I have a horse now? And I figure, well, I'll tell you what, let's wait till we get to Tennessee. And the donkeys only were $125 each. I figured, let's start there. If it doesn't work, there's no big economic loss, right? And she is not going to want to mess with mucking and all that stuff. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what, sweetheart, we're going to get you a horse, but let's wait till we get to Tennessee because we need a horse that's acclimated to that area because it's totally different weather. Okay. And then we'll find some homes for the donkeys here. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, I'm talking about the donkeys, they here, and she goes, I'm not leaving these donkeys here. These donkeys are part of the family. So the next thing I know, thinking to try to be economically, wise and frugal when buying the donkeys at 125, turns out to take the donkeys from California to Tennessee, I had to have a racehorse company do it. And at racehorse costs to bring it, they were almost $1,500 a piece to bring. So there went the whole out the door thing with trying to save money. And she went from becoming, the chair in her school of 12 K through 12 teaching music to now she's riding horses and roping and she's a cowgirl. She's the real thing. Up at 5 a.m, mucking and cleaning and feeding them at 6 o'clock. And I don't know where she finds the time, but they love her. So I'm kind of married to a ranchette as opposed to a rancher.
Jim, I'll tell you, we really appreciate you sharing that. That's a great story, and I'm curious to see what the next animals are to come and join the family.
But we have feral cats that show up, and they're really in need of eating. They're skinny, and the next thing I know, they're living at our place, and one's taken over the master bedroom, the other one's got the basement. You know, they all have their jobs. I got a new one named Snoop, who they hate him, but I keep him in the basement with a studio, and he takes care of all the mice and rats, and he loves music. When I play music, he does one of these things and gets up in my lap. And I thought, you know what, I got my own personal cat now. So, you know, out of all the animals, I do have one that likes me for a change.
Oh, that's sweet.
That's fantastic. And, you know, Jim, I appreciate you sharing all that with us because, you know, one of the things that we just enjoy doing with our show is just really having a conversation and seeing where the conversation goes. But before we go any further, there is one thing I wanted to do right off the top, and that's thank you for two things. One is you wrote years ago, Follow Your Dreams. And that song has meant a lot to me personally. It's on all of my playlists on my iPhone. And I want to thank you for that because over these last few years since we've started this show, that song plays in my head all the time. And I don't care what the other people say, and I'm doing the best I can do. And I'm living into that chorus. So thank you for that, number one.
Before you go on, your sentiment is shared by a number of, especially educators, who over the years have said almost the same thing. They actually have brought them into the classroom for their kids to listen to and comment as to what I'm saying in the lyric and what's it about and what it means to them. So they too have found ways of using the song. And you know, I tell people, I say, you know, it's always nice to write a hit song, but it's better to write a song that touches the core of people so much so that it affects their lives in a very positive way, which is what music's supposed to do. Anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
No, and I appreciate you sharing that because I can totally understand it. And that's the kind of the segue into the second thing I wanted to do was just to thank you from a broader picture for all of the music that you've brought to all of us over the years and really helping to provide a soundtrack in many ways to our lives. And it's just something that I can't imagine, you know, how many people, not just that one song, but all of the songs that you've brought to us and continue to bring to us. Just want to say thank you on behalf of all your fans for that. And now I'd like to just take a moment and take a little bit of a trip in what I'm going to call the Rosie and Bill Show time machine. So if we were to go back before your solo career, before Loggins and Messina, Poco, Buffalo Springfield, all of the bands you've been associated with in one form or another, what is your first sort of musical memory? When did music enter into your life?
Music first entered into my life. My father was a guitarist, and about 3.5 or 4, I used to touch his guitar, you know, like because he would be playing it. And, you know, somewhere around 4, he started putting it in my hands and putting my fingers on it. And I started trying to make the chords. And I remember it hurt my fingers. And I thought, how does he play this without it hurting? Around 5 or 6, I began to get the sense of how to do that. And it wasn't until around probably when I was about 8 years old, I really wanted to have my dad show me more. But he and I would lay on a couch together. We lived in California and watched Town Hall Party. And my parents were separated, so I only had 3 months with dad and 9 months with mom. But during that 9 months, my father was a very loving person, and we were very huggy, kissy. We're Italians, you know, what can I tell you? But one of my biggest joys was to lay on the couch with my dad on a Saturday night watching Town Hall Party or Cal's Corral, or one of those. Cliffy Stone had a program. And that's where I was first introduced to seeing new artists like Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two, or Lefty Frizzell, or the Collins Kids. Joe and Rosalie Maphis were popular there in the 50s, just coming around. And of course, music in those days, there was very little video or promotion, so they played wherever they could. You know, a lot of times they were mainly like honky tonks, but then there were opportunities like Cliffy Stone had. They had this Saturday night program, which I just said. I can't remember now after saying it, but you would see people on television performing, and that's kind of where I learned to play the guitar from his wall. That because there were no, there were no true tone type programs out that you could learn to study. No YouTube in those days. So that was the first part. And then about the time I turned 13, my parents then moved to Colton, California, which was between Riverside and San Bernardino. And we lived next to my grandma. And I hated that because I'd been in California and surf music was happening, and all the stomps and the girls with the blonde hair and the bathing suits and the volleyball games. And suddenly I get sent to Colton, California, which is in the Tri-County area. And I look around, there's nothing but orange groves and lemons. And, it's Future Farmers of America, which was totally shocking to me. So I remember going over to my grandmother, who lived a block away from us. We lived in an orange grove, actually. And I said to her, I was really depressed, and I was thinking, well, I need to go back to my dad. Just one of those moments. She goes, Jimmy, there's a little boy up the street named David Archuleta, and I think he's a saxophone player, and he needs a friend too. I think he's your age. Why don't you guys get together and see what happens? Long story short, I met David. He knew a piano player. The next thing you know, we had a drummer. And before I entered high school at 13, I actually entered in early and graduated early. We had a little band. And that little band got good enough to play surf music, because that's what we were listening to a local country club, where they didn't want to hire me at first. And then they realized most of their customers were Air Force people and pilots and stuff who like to come there and eat and especially drink on the weekends. And they had nothing to do with their kids. So they called my mom and said, your son was looking for a job. You think they'd like to play down at the pool house to a bunch of kids that are coming on weekends? And we said, sure. So, we got paid Shirley Temples and, soda pop. And we played for all these kids. And that was my beginning as I went into high school. So all through high school, I played music. And as I progressed, at 15, I recorded an album called Jim Messina and the Jesters, which is a surf album, which we recently, came up, and I said, I bought the rights to it, decided to release it. I don't think it's very good, but a lot of people love it. It sounds like a 15-year-old who's totally angst out, double pink. I hear my voice, and my voice is like way up here. But it's fun. It's history. But that was the first part of my life. And somewhere around 15 or 16, I was, if you want to use the word, discovered by a DJ by the name of Glenn Edwards, who worked at KEZY radio, stationed at the Disneyland Hotel. And he hired me to come. I was still in high school, hired me to come in on the weekends in Hollywood and produce records for him. So from 15 to 16 up to 17, I was in Hollywood. And that's how I got an early start in learning production work. And
Wait,
then
Jim,
after
I have to interrupt you, because how did he see in you the producer thing? What was it about you?
I have no idea. To this day and age, I have, and I never had a chance to. He was a very quiet, soft-spoken person. I'm not much of a religious or highly spiritual person, but there was a divine intervention there with this man. And before he died, for some reason, I reached out to try to find him, and I did. And I thanked him so much for all that he had done in helping me to get started in this business. And again, he was a very humble, quiet-spoken person. He was on his deathbed at that point, and was very appreciative that I had called him. So I don't know the answer to that question, but he saw something that maybe he just saw the fact that here's a kid at 15 making records, and and maybe he liked my energy or whatever, but he hit the right nail on the right head.
Yeah, and I do think you answered the question. I do think he was guided by some unseen force, and you were meant to be pulled into the business and learn different aspects of the business.
I think so. I do remember, fortunately, I didn't do drugs in my career. Thank God. My friends have really suffered from that. But my memory is very much intact, almost to 6 months. And one of the things that I remembered saying to myself, you see, I used to like to play around and make radios and stuff. And my first radios were made just before I went into high school. There, and I would take toilet paper and wrap wires around it and crystals and create antennas so that I could listen to music at night. Because we didn't have a radio, I wasn't supposed to be listening to music. I made it so I could hang it outside, and when I went to bed, I'd put my headphones on and listen to the local radio stations. But I've always felt that electronics has always guided me from a young person. And I remember saying to myself as I was getting ready to say that I wanted to learn the business of music all the way from the resistor to the legalese. And at this point in my life, I realized that's exactly how I live my life. With my studio, I'm in there, fixing things, changing resistors or hard drives, or laying on the floor, wiring patch bays and making things balanced and unbalanced. And I review all my contracts before they go out to make sure that I'm comfortable to sign them. And thank goodness for a lot of attorneys that have been in my life, because I remember my first real music business attorney was Abe Summer. And he asked me before, this was 1967, he asked me before he took me on as a client, he said, do you want to be an active client or a passive client? And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, if you're a passive client, we'll just handle everything for you, send the papers to you to sign. You send a check, and we send you the papers. I said, well, what's an active client? He says, well, that's a client who we explain what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we summarize the affect of what the clauses say, and you tell us whether or not you agree to it. And I said, I want to be one of those. And so it's been difficult in life, because it's taught me sometimes you got to say no. No matter how much the money is, you just have to say no. It's just not in your best interest to buy a lawsuit. There's enough conflict in the world as it is.
I want to pivot a little bit here, because I want to make sure we get to this, because this is really important, and then we'll get back in the time machine. I know you're working on an album right now. Talk to us about that.
Well, last year with this new band, I have a new engineer who my previous engineer would not record anything. I don't know why, but my new guy, he loves to record the stuff. So I said, look, let's record every performance. We have Pro Tools. Just run the program. So I came back with after 6 runs and doing anywhere from 4 to 10 shows on a run, with a whole host of multi-track recordings, which I went through. And I managed to find about 4 or 5 shows that really had good quality. And then out of those 4 or 5, I managed to find one that for 75% of the show, through the electric part, was fantastic. And then another one through the acoustic part that was really, really good. And since it's the same set I do every night, same musicians, I realized it would be easy for me to pull one into the other. So it's quite a task, but I have done this many times. Some of the best albums I believe that Kenny and I have done, and they sold as much as the other ones, have been our live albums. I take pride in the live performances, because I truly believe, going back to the time machine thing that you're talking about, when I used to go to a show, like if I'd go see Dick Dale and the Deltones, when I first started seeing that surf music, my friends and I, who were in the band together, we'd go watch those guys play at the National Guard Armory. And we would just sit there in awe about each of the players and what they were doing. And you get this feeling of, wow, he's playing trumpet. Listen to that. Oh my God, he's really good at that. And listen to that drummer. Boom, it's like, oh, that's such a great groove. and then we'd go home and imitate those things. But then the album would come out, and I remember listening to Dick Dale's first album that I heard with Miserlou, and I went, it sounds good, but there's something different about it than. And then I'd go back to see him play again, and I would see that excitement. And then I realized there were different players that were coming from time to time, and a certain way that the album was recorded. Now I know they were being a little too careful, and they were cutting it in the studio. And what he did live just felt so much better. And as I, started getting into that world, and especially working with Kenny, I realized that the live albums had to remain live. Don't try and fix them so much, or don't try and make them sound like a studio album, because they're not. But as I've gotten older, I've realized the players are so much better now, and the quality of the recordings are so much. Sometimes they can sound like a studio album with all of the energy of what it feels like to be playing it live. So my job is to try and, my job is not to try. My job is to work at getting those arrangements and those rehearsals so that they clearly reflect that. And I am so excited to be working with musicians who show up with their parts learned. And the only thing we need to do is to go through to make sure we can play it together.
Because of your attention to detail, your skills, your expertise, there is great sound to your shows. And that's something you take a lot of pride in, and that's clear. But the other half of it is, and this is what really blows me away, is that you still sound great. You sound as great today as you did all those years ago. So when people come to hear those songs that they remember, like on some of the albums behind me, from you with Poco, with Loggins and Messina, I've got them over both shoulders. You sound as good now as you did back then. How have you been able to maintain such a high level in those live performances with your sound?
Well, I think, I don't know how to answer your question, but I can tell you that, to me, every time I rehearse an arrangement, I've listened to what the original arrangement was, and I work to make sure that all the musicians are playing as close to what should be there, or their interpretation of it is actually better. And when I mean better, what we were trying to do, say in like on You Better Think Twice, George did a fantastic job on that and really set the pace for it. So the key is, how do we find, with the new drummer now, 50 years later, how do we find that place where we can still have that energy and tempo and time, but add to it who we are today, maintaining the same parts? And a lot of that is allowing them to come in and say, this is what I think this part should sound like, or this is what I heard. Now, sometimes they'll listen to something, that song might have been recorded 5 or 6 times. So then I have to choose, well, which one of these is going to be the better arrangement? And a lot of that has to do with the players. I try to keep in mind, 1, what was the original arrangement? Number 2, what key was it in? Number 3, do we have the singers that can sing the parts? It's important that we can get all of the parts in there. 4, do we have the integrity of the arrangement? Like, for instance, I can't afford to have 7 guys on the road right now. If my price goes up, perhaps. But a lot of times on the L&M stuff, we had 2 horn players playing together. And we also had a violinist who doubled. So to do Be Free, for a number of years, I had Gary Olear who traveled with me. And when I did Be Free, the violin part was almost like note for note for what he would do. But now I had to let the violinist go so that I could get a keyboard player, because most of the stuff we did in Loggins Messina was all keyboards. My solo work is all keyboards. So what I did is I found players again who have the ability and understand the different genre, from folk to country to rock to jazz to Latin jazz to classical, to put that violin over on a B3. Most people would say, why would you do that? Well, if you really listen to a B3, you can almost find a patch that has the sound of a viola or a violin to it, without it being a sample. So I put his part over onto that, right? My point is that I spend the time to work at trying to make those arrangements be what they were when they were originally done.
Well, you're clearly a master of music, that's for sure. And like Bill said, we thank you for that. Out of all the bands you've played with and your solo career, I mean, it's all been very illustrious. Is there a favorite thing or something that jumps out at you where you say, that is what I'm most proud of?
I have to say that every passage of time and experience I've had, I mean, when I look back at the Buffalo Springfield, I look at my first experience with the Buffalo Springfield was before I even knew them, listening to Bluebird on the radio, not knowing who they were, and then getting booked by Gypsy in the studio to work with this band called the Buffalo Springfield, and to discover while I'm going through their tapes trying to help them that they're, oh, Bluebird, this is the song I heard on the radio. Wow. That was a moment of excitement. To then work with them individually. Neil was, I thought he was the producer when I first started working with him. He came in with his tapes and he was organized and ready to work, and found it to be just absolutely wonderful and organized. Stephen was more, more right brain and impetuous, needing to, let's start record right now. And of course, Richie was like, well, what do I do? And then I get the opportunity to produce them. And I find working with each of them was a different experience. That taught me a lot about working with artists of all different kinds of personalities and interests, some of which, as I later learned, we all have, personality components to our lives, whether it's narcissism or histrionic disorders or whatever might occur, that we all tend to. I learned to work with people, with different artists in different ways. Finally working with Richie to go through Poco to look back and say, that was really a wonderful experience, Richie. What do you think? What do you think we should do? I mean, do you have any idea what you want to do? And he said, no, I don't, and I said, well, you've written, Child's Claim to Fame, and you wrote Kind Woman. And, I guess we just got through doing what's called, folk rock. I said, what about the idea of putting some country into that, country rock? And he said, well, I don't know. We'll see. Well, I still hadn't finished the Buffalo Springfield album, and now we're doing an overdub on a record at Sunset Sound that we cut in New York. And because Neil didn't show up, because Stephen was down in the village visiting friends, and of course Dewey Martin was a very spiritual human being, as we learned. He really enjoyed the spirits a lot, and showed up very spirited and unable to sing. So I asked Arif Mardin, who was working there at Atlantic, I need some musicians. We're here to record, and the guys are gone. Well, he said, I'll get you the best musicians we have in New York. And he did. But they were all jazz cats, and they interpreted the music as jazz players. And I get back and I go, Richie, this doesn't sound like the Buffalo Springfield. We need to do something like we did with Child's Claim to Fame. We had James Burton come in and play dobro on that. And I said, why don't we try to find somebody like, Red Rose or Buddy Emmons, or, and it just so happened one of the roadies said, I know this young guy named Rusty Young who lives in Colorado. He's about your age. And, I bet you he'd really enjoy the opportunity. So we bring him out. And it was while I was doing that overdub and listening to him play on a broken instrument, but just got broken and never complained, and played down an old Fender steel guitar that Stephen had collected on a tour from a pawn shop. And I hear this performance and I went, whoa, hey, Richie, maybe this guy would be a good component to what, I suggested we think about. Yeah. Well, that's how Poco started. And, from that to moving into eventually meeting Kenny and turning down, I turned down a lot of artists not to work with Kenny. I just turned down a lot of artists that Columbia had given me because, it wasn't the right situation. And I just I discovered that one of the reasons, well, Dan Fogelberg had come to me, and I asked him, I said, I like your music here, but why do you want to work with me? And he said, well, I want to make a Poco record. And I had just left Poco, and I said, I'm not the right guy for you, because I never made more than $125 a week clear working in Poco, because our music was too rock for country and too country for rock. Nobody would play it. And I said, we could sell out theaters, but we couldn't get airplay. We couldn't sell records. And I said, you're going to have to find somebody else to make that record for you, because I just can't do that again. Andy Williams was given to me as a choice. And I said, Andy Williams is one of my favorite singers of all time, but I'm too young for him. He needs somebody who's been around, who understands LA, the union, the orchestrations, somebody who can really do a great job for him. But Kenny came, and after me turning down a number of artists, because I don't know if we have time to talk about that story, but I'm happy to if you want to.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
My first beginning with Kenny was he was mentioned to me by Don Ellis, who was working in talent development under Clive Davis, at the end of my tenure with Poco in the summer. And I said, I'd love to. He said, I have a friend who, his name is Dan Loggins, and he said a little brother that's really a talented young singer-songwriter. We thought maybe you might take a listen. And I said, I will, but I can't now. Wait till I get back to California and I've finished everything. And especially my production contract is done. So I said, just, have him send me the tapes or have him bring them in. So that around Christmas time, I think at the end of that year, that was 1970, I get a call from this guy, and says, my name's Kenny Loggins, and I was told to give you a call, and maybe we get together and listen to some tunes. And I said, yeah, sure. I said, come on by. I said, let's do it. So having talked to Don, I assumed that Kenny was bringing some tapes. And so he arrives, and here's this tall guy with a part in his hair and braces on his teeth, in a velour shirt, wearing a pair of jeans that looked like he had a load in his britches. I go, hey, come on in. So he came in, we chatted for a while, and it was very cool. And, and I said, so I'd like to hear some of your music, your tapes. And he goes, I haven't got any tapes. I said, oh, Don said you had some tapes. Oh, no, I don't really have any. I said, well, then pull out your guitar. He's, well, I don't own a guitar. And I thought to myself, my wife is pulling a stump on, but these guys, they're doing something to me here, because here I get this call. They're excited, and there's no tapes. So at that moment, I felt a little like, what should I do? I said, well, I'll tell you what, I have a couple of guitars over here, acoustic guitars. So you want a nylon, or do you want maybe like a steel string? He goes, I'll take the nylon. So I had a Sony 850, TC 850 set up, and a microphone that I was working on. And I put a little footstool there, and I sat him down. I said, there's the tape recorder. There's the microphone. Tell me when you want me to press record. So I popped the record button, and he sang Danny's song. He sang House at Pooh Corner. He sang the Hivala song called My Love's Gonna Tumble on You. Old Black Smoke, a couple of songs we never really released. But the point is that I wasn't sure what to think. My wife, after he left, my wife says, well, what do you think? And I said, I don't know what to think here, because man, most of the stuff he's doing is folk music. And I said, God, we're already into, Delaney and Bonnie and Dave Mason and Leon Russell. I don't know what I would do with this. And so a couple of days went by, and I called him up again, and he came by, and I wanted to see how good of a guitar player he was, because person who doesn't own their guitar, you kind of wonder So I gave him a guitar and we'd play around and I was messing around with Pooh Corner and I said, let's try something more Baroque on this, something that would be more, um, you know, just have a finer feel to it. Um, and so we started playing around with that and he was really good at it. And then we started talking more. I said, what kind of music do you like? He's, oh, I like it all. He said, I got a job working as a singer-songwriter for this company because I can make my voice sound like anybody. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, I can make a song sound like Leon Russell. So he started singing like Leon Russell. He says, I could do Elton John. And he started singing like Elton John. And I thought to myself, wow, here's somebody who just loves music.
Mm.
And here's somebody who's not tainted by looks, by appearance, he just loves music. And I thought to myself, after what I went through with Poco, not being able to get music on the air, even when it was well ahead of its time and really what was starting to break the country, or take the country by force, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody I could actually do a diverse recording of a lot of different songs, styles, and give him an opportunity to have a better shot at being successful. And that's really what motivated me to want to work with Kenny, is that I felt that he could be diverse enough as a singer at that time to help, get him a good foot into the music business and begin a career as a solo artist. And I mention these things to you because it's about um, it's about those moments of contact or conflict or uh, having to make a decision that's going to be an important or an epic decision in your life, that when you make that decision and it happens, it's because of the thought and the way in which one puts it all together to see if it, would be a right choice. So it's about those choices, I think, that are most memorable to me, or choices that I didn't make.
Jim, if I could just interject just for a second, talking about choices, you made a couple of choices early on in that story with Kenny that were pretty pivotal. When he didn't have any tapes, you could have said, "See ya." When he didn't have a guitar, you could have said goodbye. But you
Yeah,
gave him those opportunities. You didn't
I,
just walk him out the door.
yeah, I don't know why I didn't, to be honest with you.
Divine intervention, intuition.
Yeah, that's another example of divine intervention, which I've never really quite thought about that until you just brought it up. But yeah, I could have let it go. There was just so many obstacles with Kenny. I mean, he never had a band. He didn't have an attorney. He never had an agent, and all of that stuff had to be built for him. Um, if it in fact was going to happen, um, which was one of the reasons why once we started rehearsing, I had to loan him some of my electrics. And fortunately, out of the Buffalo Springfield, because when I left the Buffalo Springfield, they were broke. We were broke. They didn't have the money to pay their me my share of what I should have gotten.
Mm.
So I took a bunch of amplifiers instead and put them in storage. And those are the things I put out for Kenny and the band, his band, to use to get him started. So those I never quite thought of it, but yeah, had I gotten the money, I probably would have spent it. But having the amplifiers allowed me to be able to have something to contribute to Kenny having what he needed to get the band going. But it's funny how things work. They don't always turn out the way you think they're going to be. But working with Kenny was a lot of work for both of us. He worked very hard as well to get his career up and going. And I think that the both of us working together, made it really happen.
Well, I'll say 16 million albums sold, that's a pretty amazing accomplishment, especially for someone who didn't anticipate joining a duo.
That was the last thing I wanted to do. I was tired of being on the road. I was so tired of being on the road. It was not fun in those days. It's much more fun today. I have great guys. We work together, and we how we even do picks when we're at home with jokes and things. And it's just a good family of folks that I'm working with now.
Well, that's good. Things have come full circle for you, and now you're kind of living on your terms and doing your music on your own terms, and you get to enjoy the balance of the music and the family and all of those things. And but we are excited to hear what you're doing, the live album that you're going to put out. And we're hopefully we'll come and see you when you come to our area. If we can.
Yeah, you gotta stay in touch with Phyllis and let her know. You'll know when I come to town.
Okay.
I do. So
that's that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, my gosh, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. And
bet.
At some point we'll have you back whenever you want to promote, the album or something else. We love talking to you. And I know there's much more to talk about, but we wish you and your family and your band all the best. And we thank you so much for joining us.
Little woman, I know what you need. I want you long enough to last. Oh, the night stays slow, it's living up easy. You need a man. Oh, it's with love and all the mind. And all I want to do is living up easy. She said, I hope you understand. As he opened up my hand, now she said, honey, you can keep the pearl, 'cause you are the man. Boy, it's long enough to last, and last a day so easy. You are the man. One with love and all his mind, and all he wants to do.
This week's episode has been brought to you by Doherty & Company Insurance Services for all your business and personal insurance needs. Our friends at Tennis Addiction in Exton, PA. And the Malin Agency, where exceeding expectations is how they do business.